just introduce myself. So I jump in instead of Francesco, not by chance. I'm also the co-founder of Tondo and actually the head of research of Tondo. And I'm going to talk about social network, and we included this analysis in the topic also because in terms of research, this is one of my special skills in terms of analytic tools and theory, with the idea precisely to somehow try to better understand what also Serena and Andrea were saying. So collaboration is a key, but also the penetration rate is very low in the industry. So therefore, we need to understand what can be the drivers that can spread and diffuse this knowledge related to circular economy. And that's why you see, in a moment, I'm going to also define the idea of social network analysis as a tool that helps us to understand where we are and how we can keep fostering this idea of diffusions. Next slide, please. All right, this is coming. So as you see, that's the second year that also we're running this type of analysis. And I think compared to other reports that are usually very high in terms of their objectives, this is a plus together to the fact that we are looking at a concrete system, which is related to Italy, which is super relevant for also the Italian ecosystem in terms of the textiles and fashion industries. So the idea was precisely to understand the relationship across different actors within the systems with the assumption that in order to diffuse these circular sustainable practices, we need to act through different stakeholders and get these different stakeholders together. So therefore, mapping what are the companies' participation, for example, to events related to circular economy and sustainability, their membership through associations, and also the participation through local, national, or international projects through different institutions, research centers, and so on, can give us an idea of how the system is connected and how the player within the system might be role models, as you see before, the idea of achievers and concrete role models in diffusing this knowledge within a system of interconnected actors thanks to their positions. So in order to do that, the best analytic tool, also somehow theoretical tool, is called social network analysis. That really help us to map basically everything in terms of collaborations. So I think you go to the next. So the approach was the same that we did for the previous report, and we work on the desk research. So the sample of companies already mentioned also by Francesco before. What we did was searching for information on the website, the non-financial report of the companies, and also through general search engines such as Google, in order to understand in this time span the events through which collaboration to which each of these companies were participating. Once we collect this information, we transform this information into a matrix, adjacent matrix forms, in which in the rows we're gonna have all the companies, and in the columns we're gonna have what we call the event, so the participation that we mentioned before. In doing that, we can use different software in order to represent this relationship that are present if at the crossing of the columns and the rows, there you will find a 1 or 0 otherwise. So This gives us the possibility also to figure out not only the positions of the individuals, but also some properties of the systems that help us to understand the potentials in terms of diffusion of the circular economy within the system. With the idea that the greater the connectivity, the more the central actor in this network are also the ones with the highest score, so are basically the achievers in our sample, the better is the possibility that in the next futures, in the near futures, these circularity practices and knowledge will expand. So go to the next, please. Right. So in terms of the sample we already mentioned, what I want to point here is that you're going to see a couple of images in which the actors can assume different shape, as you see here, which represent the typology that also Francesco mentioned before. So large fashion firms or suppliers, small, medium enterprise, both supplies and fashion firms having different shapes, as you see here. For example, an inverting triangle for the small, medium enterprise fashion firms, while regular triangles for the large enterprise suppliers. These are the shapes you're going to see in a second, and then the different dots with different colors will represent what we call the event. So going from collaborations with research and university, or participation to trade fair, and so on. The size, as you will see that later on, the size of the shape of the actors will depend on their overall score into the sustainability index that we created in the desk research. So this is also a plus of this technique that we can combine attributes plus mapping the relationship. Go to the next, please. So we already said what is the focus and the methodology. This addition method is called the bipartite network because, you know, the rows in the column are of different entities, but we can also use this network to create what is called also co-participations or one-mode network, in which we can only represent either the event, the relationship across all the event through the actors, or the collaborations and the relationship and their intensity of the actors through basically the events. As part for today, we're going to just look at the bipartite network to give you an overall sense of what is the collaborations, potential collaborations within the systems, and how the system looks like, while we refer to the report for all the others analysis. So please go ahead, please. Next. Let's say in terms of the punchline and main result, what we see, and it was expected, moving from the 2020 since today, 2023, we see an increase in terms of connectivity, both in terms of the number of actors within the systems and their relationship. So basically, we move from the 55% of companies connected in 2020. So basically 264 to the more 61% of today. So 219 out of 508 companies of this last report. What you can see in a second in a pictorial ways is that you know, as for last report, for the first one, again, large companies are the ones that made the systems, and in particular the suppliers compared to the fashion firms, while on the other end, we're going to have and see the important role of the association, especially the textiles and health associations in playing a connectionist roles within the systems. Just go ahead, please, for the next one. So The picture is very small, but you can grasp the meaning. As you see in the center where there are the squares, you have what is called the main component. So the large number of actors connecting through different type of events. At the periphery, you might see different groups or island. So for example, bottom right, you see in the circle one set of company that are isolated and just connected to each other, but disconnected from this main component. As you can also see on the left in this imaging, the periphery of this image. On the top of the right, we can identify particular somehow cluster in which there are some event, or in this case, Milano Unica, for example, in the bottom left, that represent the most central node around which all the actors are located. Meaning that many companies, especially the suppliers in our systems, are participating to these trade fairs. So that concentrates most of our actors, meaning that they're also offering an opportunity for the actors to interact, and therefore, in the case of actors that are very knowledgeable or high in our index, there can be the possibility to transfer this knowledge, or at least to represent somehow role models for other companies. On top of the right, instead, you have the fashions and design type of event to which many fashion firms, in this case, gravitate. So you have the Milan Fashion Weeks, you have the Salone del Mobile that represent somehow the central events around which all these actors are gravitating. Finally, as we were mentioning, there are some central areas that potentially connect these two big emergent somehow clusters that are represented in this case by Pitti, in which both fashion firms and supplier can connect. Otherwise, what we see is usually that the people in this case, company, tend to build connection through homophoby. So company of usually same size or same industry, in this case, suppliers versus fashion firms tend to flock together. That's what this is. Of important notes, as you see in the bottom also the slide, is to highlight that unfortunately, even though we were mentioning that different stakeholders should play a big role in terms of diffusing this knowledge, but also diffusing and changing the attitude, we see that, for example, research center and universities are kind of disconnected from the practices, from the industries, while they are connected to each other. And also, as was already mentioned, the key roles of the association that again can be able to translate both the new rules the European developed at the European level, but also to help to develop standards in terms of practices that can be useful in order to make this transition towards circular economy. Go to the next, please. So here we were stressing the importance of the penetrations of these practices. Also, Francesco was mentioning that many organizations are disconnected. The problem is not just having disconnected companies that cannot benefit through these co-participations, and potential collaborations, relationship, and formal relationship across firms to know about the practices. The problem is even bigger if these firms are having a very high score in terms of performance on our own index. As you see in this case, compared to last year, we see an improvement because many firms that are having higher scores, you see, these bigger nodes, triangles, Octagon, and so on, are in the center. Though there are still some of them isolated or at the periphery, as you see in the bottom, so that are easily to be disconnected, making these potential diffusion potentially weaker. And again, as we mentioned, there are the large enterprise, especially supplier, to dominate this phenomenon, which is also, something that we can expect and also keep fostering. Go ahead, last one. So to conclude, we see that an increase in terms of internet connections, which is a good news in terms of the possibility to have more and more firms breaking the barriers, also the cognitive ones, in order to adopt more sustainable circular practices, and also having role models or companies that are better in a better positions in terms of their knowledge and their actual practices, help them to see that it's feasible and also financially sustainable from one side. From a policy point of view, if we think about Milano Unica and other trade fairs, we can think about institutions to keep fostering, an association fostering somehow the participations to these type of events in which they can really get in touch with other companies that can provide role modeling and knowledge to firms that are maybe more reluctant. This is fundamental because we need an ecosystem approach in terms of value chains in order to really have diffusions of circular economy practices in concrete. Other elements are thematic clusters that association can provide, and other elements that show you somehow the importance of combine not only the producer and also the distributors or the fashion firms, but also the other institutions such as NGOs, local institutions, cities, and associations into the process. Thank you.